There we go. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Good evening. My name is Adam, and I'm excited to be with you all tonight. We're going to be talking about a very important topic, and we have a very special guest with us, actually two of them, and I'm just very excited to be talking about this topic tonight with you all. So our first speaker is Dr. Nicole Monteiro. And Dr. Nicole Monteiro is a licensed psychologist, published researcher, and author. She's an assistant professor in the graduate psychology program at Chestnut Hill College. Dr. Monteiro is an expert in trauma and global mental health and has worked and consulted internationally in Africa, the Middle East, South America, and Europe. Her company, the Center for Healing and Development, provides mental health and wellness services for individuals, families, and communities, and conducts holistic wellness programs and coaching groups for women, with the most recent being the Boundaries to Bliss 30-day bootcamp. So I'm excited for this topic, and I'm excited to hear from her. So Dr. Nicole Monteiro, thank you for being with us tonight, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you for welcoming me. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. I'm so happy to be here and talking about this really, really important topic. And so I know I was asked to answer a few questions or speak on a few questions around trauma and mental health and just what we all need to know to be our best and our most well emotionally and psychologically. I know trauma is a huge topic that a lot of people are talking about. And one of the questions was sort of how to think about trauma, how to know if someone is experiencing or suffering from trauma, how to know how to respond and what the signs and symptoms are. One thing I would say is that trauma is very, very common. In fact, almost all of us are going to or have experienced some form of trauma at some point in our lives, whether it's what we call big T trauma, like huge, what might seem like catastrophic things, or little T trauma, traumas that might seem a little smaller in scale, but still have a great impact on us. And so this is in some ways part of the human condition. Trauma is basically anything that overwhelms our capacity to cope and affects us, that has sort of a lasting impact on us holistically, psychologically, emotionally, in terms of our relationships, our sense of ourselves, identity, meaning, just on many different levels, even physically. So it's something that almost all of us will experience at some point. The other thing, though, is that resilience is a really huge part of the human condition. In so many ways, we've dealt with trauma and chronic stress as humans, but we're built to kind of be resilient from it. The thing, though, is that there are many times when trauma, it just doesn't naturally resolve, or there weren't the support systems or things in place to kind of facilitate our resilience. So many of us might have unresolved trauma. That's usually what people are talking about. What are the signs of unresolved trauma? And I would say it could be any and everything, right? Because when I say trauma overwhelms our capacity to cope and has a lasting impact, it can integrate into or affect different facets of our life, from how we view ourselves. So things like our self-esteem, like how we trust or interact in relationships, to how we are triggered. So we might be what we call hypervigilant and always on edge, looking for danger to protect ourselves from danger. It could impact our mood. So in terms of having feeling depressed or sad or experiencing anxiety. It could impact how we perceive our future, whether we feel like there's hope for the future, or we have any, sense that we will be a part of a positive future. So those are the global ways that trauma can affect us if it's unresolved. A lot of people are wondering about specific diagnoses, though. So there are some mental health diagnoses that are associated with trauma. Specifically, you've probably heard about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And this is a relatively newer diagnosis. It came about in the 1980s, actually after looking at a syndrome or collection of behaviors from war veterans from Vietnam, where, because it's almost like shell shock. and what happened to them after they came back from war, the experience of having all of these overwhelming symptoms and anxiety, nightmares, intrusive thoughts that you can't control, feeling irritable, having difficulty in relationships. So those are some of the signs of PTSD. But not everyone who's had a trauma will experience PTSD. Some of it will be they might have depression, chronic depression, especially which is like sadness, maybe feeling hopeless, learned helplessness, feeling low energy, low appetite, those types of things, or anxiety, which is chronic worrying, not able to, worrying about everything, not able to stop your mind from thinking and ruminating and obsessing over things. So those are just some of the areas where unresolved trauma, especially if it results in a mental health diagnosis, those are some of the ways that it might manifest itself. Another question that people have is sort of, how does past trauma affect us, which is sort of related, right? And in those cases, a lot of times what people are talking about is childhood trauma, things that we hear about, such as child abuse or sexual abuse or abandonment, loss of a parent, witnessing domestic violence, or if there's been some sort of war or conflict in your community or, from your cultural background. Traumas from childhood have a way of affecting a child's development and how they perceive the world, how they perceive themselves. So it can affect whether or not they're able to trust or have healthy attachments as they grow up, or it could affect their sense of self and their self-esteem. Many of you may have heard of something called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study or Survey. And that's a study that was done about 30 years ago that looks at how some of these childhood traumas affect people later on in life into adulthood. And the study found that traumas such as some of those I described, abuse, neglect, witnessing domestic violence, having a household member who had severe mental illness or was incarcerated, or conflict within the family with parents, these types of things, if they are not given due attention to the child, where they get some sort of help or support or treatment, that later on in life, those things can affect everything from your mental health with some of those diagnoses I described, down to life outcomes, like if you have difficulty in finishing school, or being steady in terms of functioning in your work and employment, even down to physical problems. So they saw a correlation or a connection between things like diabetes, high blood pressure, other chronic illnesses, and having experienced a lot of early childhood trauma or adverse experiences. So we know there's evidence that trauma affects us globally, and particularly if it happens to us as children, and we are not, we just let traumas happen and we don't try to offer support, help, counseling, some sort of way to facilitate a person having resilience. It can have lasting impacts. So that's, in our field, we like to say there's the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? So the sort of the bad part or the ugly part is like trauma, especially early childhood trauma. If it's just left and we don't, do anything about it, it can affect people well into their adulthood, and it can affect them in many different areas of their life, from physically, psychologically, emotionally, occupationally, educationally, engaging in high risk behaviors, substance abuse, and so forth. The other part, though, is that what I said earlier is that we all have resilience. We are sort of endowed with resilience. It's almost like this inner superpower that just has to be tapped into. And there are many different ways to tap into it. There's so much research that shows that if a child experiences a traumatic event early in life, what really matters is the event matters, but what really matters is what the adults in that child's environment and surrounding do. Are they affirmative? Are they encouraging? Are they supportive? Are they validating? Or are they dismissive, invalidating, not caring, telling them to stuff it and just, be quiet, don't talk about it? Those are the things that matter. So we have so much that we can do in terms of helping people to recover in the immediate aftermath of a trauma, or later on. Many of us are adults who may have experienced traumatic events, and we never got that validation, we never got that sense of how to build resilience. But these are skills that we can still learn in adulthood, as we continue to grow. So the whole thing about childhood trauma is that it does have an impact, but especially, we say that children are both vulnerable and resilient. It's that period where, the same way a child um, is vulnerable to something, they're also resilient. So they can learn languages very easily at young ages, or even as simple as like a burn. If a young child gets burned, their skin, their collagen is there and ready to sort of regenerate and heal the skin in ways that an older person would take longer. So children are extremely resilient. But we do know, even into adulthood, we can help a person to build those skills of resiliency through mindset, through different treatments for trauma, through different I helping them to reframe how they see themselves, forge healthier connections and relationships in their lives. So there's that twin side of like, yes, the impact of trauma is serious. It's very, it's deep, but the capacity for resilience is also very is very deep as well. Um, so another question that I was asked to talk about is sort of what is it that we can all do? Like, how, if we know for a fact that there's a child or a young person or an adult in our lives that has experienced trauma, what can we do? How can we help? And I always say one of the most important things is to be mindful and self-reflective and aware of your own trauma. Like I said, trauma is common. If you just scratch the surface there, I guarantee you, for almost 90 to 95% of people, there is some trauma in your own personal life and that of your family or your extended family, your community. So you've been touched by trauma. And so many times we are not in touch with how trauma has touched us. So it makes it easier for us to dismiss and discount other people who are more obviously struggling with it. So one of the first, most important things to do is to be aware of and really try to have insight into ways that trauma has touched your life and the ways that maybe you have pushed it away or you've tried to be in denial about it. Denial is one of the sort of most primitive, basic defenses that we have as human beings. So we often don't, it's so hard. Sometimes the traumas and, things that we experience are so painful that we try to push them away. And so we tend to, we may use denial even unconsciously as a coping mechanism. So sometimes we're in so much denial about our own trauma that it's painful to see someone else who's struggling with it. And that's where we tend to act in ways that where we lack compassion or we are not validating towards them. And we're questioning and we're, just not being supportive or not helping to facilitate resilience. So that's number one. Number two, I would say it's so important to educate ourselves about trauma in general. I have this book that I love, which is called Trauma is Really Strange. And it's almost like written almost like a comic, but it explains so much about trauma from the physiological impact that it has. So major traumas can we respond, we're animals, we're human beings, but we're animals. So we respond to trauma, especially trauma that is perceived as dangerous to our bodies and our systems, in a physical way. And so this book really explains the ways that our body and our system might put us into a fight or flight or freeze response when we first experience a trauma. And if that's not worked through, then some of those symptoms of PTSD that I told you about, they mimic the fight, flight, or freeze uh, response that we had when we first experienced the trauma. Other ways of just understanding the psychological ramifications. So I talked about intrusive memories that are hard to get out of your mind, nightmares, wanting to withdraw, feeling irritable, feeling disconnected, right? So there's a whole list of symptoms, but there's so many resources like this book, like websites, the National Traumatic Stress a Child Traumatic Stress Institute website. There are just resources out there, blog posts. You can go to my website, chadwellness.com. I have blog posts and information about trauma. So informing ourselves and understanding that when we see someone who's struggling with psychological, emotional, mental health, or even physical or just life, looks like they're struggling in life, it's important to have compassion and understand that there's probably a reason behind that. And that if there's a pattern of someone really struggling, that to think about that they may have had some trauma that they just haven't been able to work through, or that they're still struggling with. And that level of compassion is really, really important. The other thing is just helping to destigmatize mental health in general. You know, we are so quick to go to get medication and go see a doctor for high blood pressure or diabetes or chronic illnesses. You know, if you were diagnosed with cancer, what would you do? You would follow up. You wouldn't just sit and say, oh, well, I'll see what's going to happen. Right. So the same with our mental and emotional and psychological health and well-being. We ignore it, we stigmatize it, we think that it represents a weakness or something that's wrong with us, or something that is deficient in us, morally corrupt even in some ways, or hereditary. We don't want to marry into families where um, where that person has mental illness, right? So we have all of these ideas that stigmatize people that are struggling outwardly with mental health, and stigmatize asking for help, which only exacerbates and compounds the problem, right? And we can use those medical examples again. If you have sugar diabetes and you never get treatment, it's only going to it's a progressive disease untreated. So it's only going to become progressively worse. So we have to think about our mental and emotional well-being in the same ways, in terms of ourselves and our loved ones and people around us. So anything that we can do to contribute to destigmatizing these experiences, normalizing the fact that almost all of us have experienced trauma, reinforcing uh, resilience and coping skills, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit, that those are really, really important. Another question that I was asked to speak to is, what are some of the treatments that are like ways of addressing severe trauma? So there are, the trauma field has just really exploded over the last few decades. So much work, so much expertise in applying and looking at different types of trauma, individual trauma, collective trauma, war-based trauma, which I do a lot of work with, racial trauma, right? So we're understanding it in different capacities. Some of the really great treatments that have taken hold, we're much more integrated and holistic. So a lot of the work that I do is integrating body-based or somatic treatments, where awareness of how and where trauma has sort of gotten stuck in the body is key, using mindfulness, breathing, mindfulness and visualization or guided imagery, meditation to keep us in the present moment. Some great treatments such as EMDR, eye movement and desensitization and reprocessing therapy, which is a way of sort of trying to facilitate the way healing or processing of trauma in the brain, because sometimes when we have PTSD or just chronic trauma symptoms, it's almost as if those trauma memories are stuck in the brain and they're just in this feedback loop. And EMDR is a way that helps to kind of get unstuck and processed in a more healthy way. There are people incorporating things like yoga. People are more accepting now of various religious coping strategies. So therapists used to be who were not maybe associated with a certain religion, used to be kind of shy about talking about spirituality and religion in sessions, but now recognize that that's a huge and important part of coping for many people. And therapy, talk therapy, which therapy is sort of the foundation, and then it incorporates different approaches and techniques. So one of the main things with trauma is that, and so often trust has been broken. There's a sense of betrayal, not just for the trauma, but how those people responded. Why didn't anyone do anything? Why didn't anyone help or save me? So really helping to rebuild trust in relationships, feeling a sense of being able to engage in close, intimate relationships and forge connections. All of those things can be worked through in therapy, because therapy is, in essence, a relationship. It's a corrective, supportive relationships that has boundaries, that helps a person who is struggling to feel safe within that relationship. So, those are some of the things. And of course, medication if necessary. Sometimes some of the people that I work with struggle so badly with things like sleep, chronic insomnia, or the certain physical symptoms of depression, such as fatigue and low motivation and low energy. And so medication is one thing that may be helpful to some people. What's important is to get a holistic uh, view of what you're struggling with. And I'll tell you, a lot of times people, the root of what they're struggling with might be related to some trauma that they've had earlier, but they aren't aware. What they're aware of is, I can't sleep, or I'm always, my friendships or relationships aren't working out, or I can't focus at work, or I'm always arguing with my boss. So they see those real life surface problems. And then when it comes to therapy, our job is to really try to understand what are the roots of those problems. Yes, these are the symptoms, but where did that come from, and how can we try to address that? The last two questions have to do with uh, the current situation, the pandemic, which is itself a sort of collective trauma. How has COVID and 2020 itself has just been, in the U.S., we're reckoning with social injustice, a recognition of racial trauma, even going into 2021. Now we're highlighting sort of anti-Asian hatred, and Islamophobia has always been around. So, there are these ways that we have always been reckoning with the collective trauma. And then we add on a pandemic, which really made people who were vulnerable in some ways extremely vulnerable. So for the person who was barely holding on because they were able to go to the mosque, or they were able to go to work and see coworkers, a lot of that was stripped away because social interaction was taken away. A lot of people's coping skills, such as maybe going to the gym to work out, or being in some sort of sports team, or going out to clubs to dance, whatever it is that was their outlet. For many people, that was taken away. So if they were already vulnerable, it just became exacerbated. Then there was the added anxiety and worry, everything on the news. You see, there was the unknown and the uncertainty of COVID. You hear about all the deaths, and now it's the different variants. So all of that can contribute to a sense of like not having control, lack of certainty, and just feeling anxious, depressed, overwhelmed. isolated. Those were a lot of the things that I heard. Many people, women were suffering in ways with women with children because a lot of the extra duties of like if when schools went virtual was falling on, the wife or the mother. So, and there were just different segments of the population. Children were suffering a lot with, some people said their children excelled with online learning. A lot of children and teenagers during the period where they should be out and sort of, learning skills of independence and, you know, socializing with social groups, a lot of that was taken away. And so a lot of teenagers were experiencing mental health difficulties, or college students. I was working with a lot of college students who just felt a sense of lack of purpose, or what use is it? And I'm isolated and I'm already, the things that I used to do that would take my mind off of, maybe my self-doubt or the way I was, negative self-talk and all of that. I used to do activities and now all of those things are gone. So I'm just isolated and stuck in my head. So those are some of the things, ways that, the past year and COVID have exacerbated things, not to mention that if you've actually had COVID, there's a lot of research looking at some of the long-term mental health effects or consequences of that. And then the other question I was asked to speak to is like, well, what can we do, right? We talked about like, all right, this is the problem and this is how trauma is, and there's stigma and the pandemic. Like it can feel like a heavy weight, and it can feel like, well, what can we do? Um, so I have this written down. I love acronyms and letters. Um, and I call it the 3 C's. I have something else that I call the 3 M's, which is a way of sort of being preventative with our wellness and well-being, which is trying to incorporate the 3 M's into our life every day, eating some mood boosting foods, engaging in some form of movement. Remember, listen, I didn't say exercise, movement where you get out of your head and into your body, and practicing some form of mindfulness, which is you being focused in the present moment, either through deep breathing, meditation, prayer, whatever it is that gets you focused in the moment without judgment of yourself, right? So those are the 3 M's. But I also like to talk about the 3 C's, which are compassion for yourself and others when you're struggling, when others around you are struggling, when so much is unknown. Control, focusing on the things you can control. Those are things like your daily routine, um, how you try to reframe your things and have a new perspective, the ways in which what you eat, what you do day to day. There are many things that are outside of your control, but there is a sphere within your life of things that are in your control that are important to focus on. And then the other C is what I call coping skills. We all have to build and sometimes readjust our coping skills. Things like, how do we recognize when we're overwhelmed and we're feeling emotionally drained or just stressed out? Being aware of that. What are some things that we can do? Do we need to take a walk? Do we need to call a friend? Do we need to journal? Do we need to go and I like to call it the emotional release technique. You acknowledge your feeling, uh, shake it out. Sometimes just shake it out, write it out, wash it off, and let it go, right? Those, kind of little techniques that you have to deal with the day-to-day stressors and feelings of being overwhelmed, stressed out, and just not feeling good, right? Sometimes it just comes down to we just aren't feeling good. While we're isolated from each other because of the pandemic, we're more connected and tuned in with social media, but we know that social media can contribute to some of those feelings of like self-comparison. Oh, somebody wrote 5 books during the quarantine and all I've done is lay on the couch and watch Netflix. Like there's just all of these ways that it can fuel inadequacy and feeling like that self-comparison. So you want to be mindful that of that. One coping skill is knowing when to disconnect and knowing how you want to reconnect with your social media. So those are the 3 C's: this compassion for yourself and others, control, looking at what is that sphere of things, control that you do have, and establishing a daily routine for yourself is one of the best ways to facilitate that sense of control. And then building coping skills. And as I mentioned, some of the things: walking, talking to a friend, finding some form of emotional release, learning how to get out of your body, um, journaling, which I am a huge fan of, free form journaling when something is bothering you, and whatever else, religious and spiritual practices to cope, whatever it is that helps to reduce those feelings of overwhelm and help you cope, are really, really important. So I think I've answered the main questions that I was provided and given.
Thank you very much,
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Monteiro.
Mm-hmm.
I know many people are going through so many challenges at this time,
Mm-hmm.
so it's very nice to have this presentation to understand different methods of coping with those hardships. And actually, you mentioned 2 things. The first one is like focusing on what you can control, and I feel like
Mm-hmm.
to accept those. You just need to focus on what you can control, accept that it's an issue or it's a hardship or a trauma, and then focus on that. And the second thing you actually talked about was movement, and like how much that helps out. I was actually talking to a friend of mine who is a psychologist, and she was
Mm-hmm.
talking about different panic attacks and anxiety attacks.
Mm-hmm.
She was talking about how that is a physical reaction to an emotional problem that one may face. So
Mm-hmm.
must face that within physical reaction. So
Mm-hmm.
a physical action. So going out for a walk, going for a drive. So not just exercise, like you said, but any movement that just puts you in the right state of mind to focus on what you're going through and things like that. So
Mm-hmm.
thank you very much for everything that you said.
Mm-hmm.
I actually wrote down a lot of notes. I'm excited about that.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
At this time, we're going to be doing a Q&A with Dr. Monteiro and Shayma Ghaleb. And I'm just going to introduce Shayma Ghaleb before we dive into the questions.
Mm-hmm.
Shayma Ghaleb is a 24-year-old sophomore at the Chamberlain University College of Nursing. She has been an active member in the community for over 10 years, where she has been involved with numerous activities and academic initiatives in the Metro Detroit area. For many years, she dedicated her life and studies to working with low literacy communities to help encourage children to attend school and further secondary education. She was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis at the age of 19, and ever since, she's been bravely sharing her hardships with hundreds of people in hopes to show others that they are not alone. So I'm excited to have Sister Shayma Ghaleb with us. And we're going to start with her. So my first question to you, Shayma, is so just talk to us a little bit about yourself, and then talk to us about some hardships that you have faced ever since being diagnosed with MS.
Okay, first I want to say, Dr. Monteiro, I was literally having a mental breakdown right before the situation happened. And then listening to you just calmed me down, and I'm just like, we're good, we're cool. So I just want to thank you personally for that.
Thank you.
But yeah, sure. I want just like a little intro about what MS really is.
Mm-hmm.
So multiple sclerosis is an autoimmune disease. So what that means is that my body mistakes itself and attacks itself. So a lot of immune diseases that many people are more familiar with hearing are things like lupus, cancer, HIV, rheumatoid arthritis, things within that nature. Every single autoimmune disease attacks a certain part of the body. MS attacks the nerves. So the one thing about nerves that many people know is that once your nerves are what you have, and they're very, very, very hard to replenish. So usually what you have is what you have, and once they work or once they stop working, they either don't work enough or they are at little or low capacity. So with that being said, there's a lot of hardships that go unseen, and I know Dr. Monteiro was going a lot about this fear of this unknown, And unfortunately, that is the basis of MS. Like, you don't know what's going to happen to your body. You don't know what day or when or how it's going to manifest like onto your body. There are so many different ways that MS has personally affected me, and so many different like avenues. It's ridiculous. Like, I'm not even gonna. It's legit ridiculous. So like, just a few of them. I've lost the ability to talk. I've lost the ability to walk before. I'm actually now experiencing like a very weak leg. So I do have motility and mobility issues. Cognitive issues are a huge one. And that's probably the biggest one, where it affects the mental health region, which is very, very huge to me, because I do not appreciate the feeling that my community or that my surroundings make me feel because I suffer with something. So that's something that I feel like we're definitely doing right by not necessarily exposing, but shedding a great light onto it. And I think this is just the beginning. This is how we start. This is how we were able to have people to understand and to spread awareness. And this is literally everything. But MS does also affect the mental and the spiritual aspect as well. And a lot of people, that's the biggest thing that I want to like talk about. The physical aspect, yes. MS, all you have to do is do a Google search and you'll see the millions and millions of things that MS patients deal with. Thing is, though, MS is considered the snowflake disease, so no two MS patients have it the same. So a lot of the mental health problems that come to us, we'll all say depression, or we'll all say it falls under the category of anxiety. However, it channels, it shows in very, very different ways, in very, very different forms, very, very different. And then I wanted to highlight the spiritual aspect as well. I want to say that obviously when you go through something very, very big in life, the biggest thing that's going to take the biggest toll is your relationship with your Lord. So I'm not going to lie. Before I had this beautiful relationship that grew between me and my Creator, I'm not going to lie. I had a very, very rough time where I just didn't want to accept anything. And I know you were talking about denial, and that was literally the stage that I was in. I was denying everything. I didn't even want to hear it. I didn't even want to listen. I didn't even want to look in the mirror. I didn't want to eat. I didn't want to give into it at all. I just wanted it to go away. And by me doing that, and by me following into that lifestyle, it made me more sick. It made me more problematic. It gave me more with. The minute I started learning this resiliency factor and learning how to be mindful, that's when it actually started. And what drives me insane is when people think being mindful or doing these little simple exercises that we can implement on our daily activity. I don't like it when people use the word silly or they don't think it works. Like, don't judge unless you've tried it, because it does work. We're coming from somebody that lives it, and you're talking about journaling. This is my journal. This is my journal. So,
so powerful.
Journals all the 100%. It is so powerful.
All right.
Can I just say thank you for that? I mean, it's just so powerful to hear you and your bravery. And you have no idea how you're going to impact people by sharing your story, your struggles, but also your resilience. And we don't have enough of this because there's always shame about something. Everything is supposed to be like, this is for social media or the gram or this or that. And no one's there to really tell their struggles and what they're doing to overcome. So like, you know, everyone has heard of MS, but has anyone heard the story, like what you're describing? So I just want to thank you, because I think that that's also a part of your mental health, which is like you're refusing to hide and you're being like an advocate to help other people as well as yourself.
And that's my coping mechanism. And that's my second question is I couldn't, when I was thinking about these questions and how to answer them to the best of the ability and to be 100% truthful, how do I cope with my hardships? How do I cope with all of the associations that come with MS? And for me, how I deal with it is I talk about it. I'm open about my situation. I don't look at this and I don't let it belittle me at all. I look at what God has given me, and I look at it as a beauty, as something that you know how like now social media is talking about what's your flex. This is my flex. This is my flex. This is my flex. I'm able to talk about the hardships that I went through, and as it motivates me to just talk about it, I know that there are other people that are going through similar situations, and that can definitely relate. And I'm all about that relationship, because hardship is the best way to relate to somebody, if you ask me.
Yes.
Thank you, Shayma. And I think like one of the first steps to going through any challenge or focusing on what you can control is that, you know, there's a verse in the Quran where God doesn't do anything to us unless he knows that we can overcome it. And I feel like that's one of the biggest things that I try to focus on all the time. And then, like Shayma said, like, don't look at it as a negative thing, but try to see the positive in every situation. So thank you, Shayma, for that. Dr. Monteiro, I know you touched up a bit on this earlier, and I just wanted to ask you, obviously we're still going through this pandemic, and it has impacted the lives of so many people. So many have lost family members, jobs, and are just continuing to go through so many hardships. So very briefly, what advice do you have for people who are going through trauma, hardship, like just some basic advice? What can you talk about?
I mean, I think one of the things is almost like what Shayma was saying. We have to acknowledge it. And there's going to be a period where maybe denial or not facing it feels safer, and that might be necessary a little bit in the beginning. But at some point, we have to face it so that we can reach out for support and help. And I think, you know, social support is one of the most sort of powerful things that we can tap into. And we don't always have the social support that we want in our lives, in our immediate surroundings, but that is a sign that we kind of have to be courageous enough to reach out. So really either strengthening the social connections that you have already, or reaching out. Like, look how I met Shayma. This is on Instagram. And you know, it's like you have to reach out, and I'm always going to be in touch with you all because I just believe in what you're doing. And so sometimes you get that sense of like connection by just reaching out, strengthening the relationships you have, or getting stronger ones, and then really paying attention to your what you do daily. Whether the first step is, how can you get enough sleep? How can you make sure that you're not wearing yourself so much that you don't eat? And I'm not talking about if you don't have food, that's another thing. But some people, you have food, but you're just so anxious, right? So you have to be sure to take care of yourself, to try not to let that go by the wayside, like just on a very basic level. This is the time where self-care is almost like a very just basic need. It's not the spas and all that. It's like just on a day-to-day basis, taking care of yourself.
Thank you, Dr. Monteiro. I think like one of the things, like whenever I'm going through a hardship or like going through anxiety, or anybody that I know that going through something, I always tell them, I say, talk to somebody, talk to anyone about what you're going through. It helps so much to talk about it. And one thing is, I was even talking to someone, and they talked to me about the empty chair theory.
Oh,
You're like, go on a drive and act like you're talking to somebody. Just saying it out loud helps so much. So I tell everybody, strengthen your social skills and talk about it. So thank you very much for that. Shayma, I wanted to ask you, how have cultural norms or stigmas about MS and other medical and psychological diagnoses in our community affected your ability to cope with these challenges?
Okay, I'm sorry, Mama, if you're listening to this one. I'm so sorry. The culture did me wrong. The culture did me so wrong, man. My community did me so wrong. And for a person that gave my heart and my soul to this community, and I've been working in it since I was basically in diapers. My community did me so wrong. And I'll tell you what I mean by this. When you feel unwanted, when you feel belittled, when you feel not good enough, and I'm coming from a person that's very, very vocal. I'm a very vocal person. And if my community is allowing me to feel this way, that's something on them. That's not a me problem. That I should not be feeling this way because I already feel so much. I already have so much going on in my world that I should at least, when I walk into the public, I should at least feel some type of support. Whether you understand what I'm going through or you don't. Because as a human being, the one thing that we all ask for is basic human decency. And what that means is respect. And how Dr. Monteiro was saying is to be a little bit compassionate, just a little. Nobody's asking you to fake it. No, if you don't understand it, don't say anything. If you have nothing nice to say, stay quiet. So when I have somebody, like when I'm parking handicapped, right? And I get a comment screaming at me, why you parking handicapped? You're a liar, you're this, you're that. And I have to turn around and I have to defend what I have. Like, just because you can't see something, just because you can't understand something, that's a blessing. That's a blessing. God decided that you don't get to have these burdens that some people have to have. And these things are what God gives us because he knows we can control them. So it's not like I said, I don't look at these things, or I don't look at what the community looks at me and I say, oh, let me feed into this. Oh, they don't make me feel wanted. Not feel wanted. No, I'm gonna push it even farther. You always kill with kindness, and you always show your best version. So I mean, I always have my off days, but I always will project positivity, even through my negativity. Even when I'm in my down and when I'm in my gutter, it is so important to our community doesn't do a job with that. It makes me, it kind of saddens me knowing that I have to work against my community to make my community like hop on, you know what I mean? To get on the train, for example. And it's so funny because when I went public on Instagram, I got so much hate. I got people telling me you're never gonna get married. I feel bad for your family. I feel this. I feel that you're ashamed to this. You're ashamed to the community. You're ashamed to your religion. You're ashamed to your culture. And it's like, do you know God gives his test to his strongest soldiers? So how am I ashamed? How does that work? So I feel like our culture works on a hypocritical backward movement. And there's people like Dr. Monteiro. There's people like you that are to break that or normalize talking or normalize the things that people go through in their daily lives to show that we're all very relatable. We're all very relatable. And that's why I'm very open. I want to show the world that I'm very relatable. I go through the same things that every single person goes through. It's just mine manifested in a different view. Mine manifested in MS. Somebody else might manifest in a divorce. Somebody might manifest in like family issues. Somebody might manifest it in financial instability. Mine manifested in health. And when you get tested with such a big one, you learn what real fear is. And so when people have like this issue of people, that's a fear. So if they're having if they're not able to like reach out to somebody because they're going through something, it's because they're scared. And there's nothing wrong with you as a strong, resilient, mindful person going to try to help them. If you know that somebody's not able to communicate well, be the better person. Be the person that you know you are and try to help somebody feel better. Do it. You yourself will feel guaranteed. And I'm the living example of that. I've helped hundreds of people, hundreds. And I'm telling you, every single one, they help me too. It's a mutual benefit.
Yeah, thank you, Shayma. And actually, you touched up a little bit about my next question for Dr. Monteiro. And when people are going through hardships, and I'll be honest with you, like before COVID happened, I really didn't feel, and I'm very happy and I'm very blessed. Actually, I didn't feel many hardships and things, but things happened in my personal life, and COVID hit, and different things happened, and it all happened within 1 year. So I've never experienced a lot of this before. Like, what's your message for somebody like Shayma said who might be scared? Like, they don't know one, what they're going through, and two, they don't know how to go about it. They don't have the resources available to maybe go to a therapist, or they don't have someone to talk to. What I know, spreading awareness about different things throughout our community is probably the first step. But what's your message, and what can you tell us today about for those who are going through that?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, you are not alone. It doesn't matter what your struggle is, there is someone else in this world who is struggling like that. And even remember when I said trauma is part of the human, we all have had it, right? We have different hardships, but you are not alone. So it's important, even if you can't see the person in front of you who is struggling, to know that you're not alone. Know that how you're feeling is normal. So much of it is we beat ourselves up for not being perfect or for not being strong all the time, and you have to know it's normal. Whatever it is that you're experiencing, you're not the only one, and it's normal. And I think the talking, as you both mentioned, reach out to someone, look for people who can inspire you. Sometimes it's listening to someone. And I would say, trust yourself. If you're listening, because everybody now has a platform and a microphone. If you're listening to someone and they're saying something that deep in your heart makes you feel bad, makes you feel like you're not good enough, like you're not this or you're not that, turn it off. You have to protect your mental well-being. There are enough people out there with a positive message, and that with a message that fits with how you view yourself and your world and your relationship with God and everything. There are enough people out there. So I would say keep looking for the positive, because you don't want to make yourself feel worse with all of the negative things. Like when I'm hearing what Shayma, when you're saying people said this and that, you have to learn to tune that out. And it's not easy, because sometimes it's the people close to you. But know you're not alone. Know that what you're feeling is normal. Learn to gravitate to people that have a positive message for you.
Yeah. I think one of the most important things too, like when you're going through any challenges or hardships, so number one, focus on going through those, focus on what you can control. The other thing that I tell so many people, and for a lot of people who've never heard it before, it might sound funny, but I feel like it's all about building self-confidence and self-love. Like loving yourself, being able to put yourself first, like that's so much, so important. And then when you talk about these struggles, like Shayma said, like when you talk about these struggles and people tell you things like, you're a disgrace, you're not gonna get married, things like that, and you could just like kind of almost laugh it off, because you know that I'm putting myself first, and I love myself, and I'm confident in myself, and I know what I'm doing that's right, and then just moving on. So I love what you just said.
Yeah.
Shayma, so my question for you is, in your opinion, what can others in the community do to build awareness about MS or other immune conditions, or any mental or psychological conditions? In your opinion, what can people in the community be doing right now?
Right. So I don't like necessarily that question necessarily, because I mean, yeah, I really want people to know what MS is. That would be really nice and sweet. But I just want people to be more mindful. That's what it is. I want people to be able to understand that somebody is going through something, and just because you don't understand it does not mean you have the right to understand it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So what I would like is just simply don't assume. Don't assume you know something. That's it. Don't assume you know something, because if you don't assume, you're just asking for knowledge. You're literally telling the person, I'm not ignorant. I'm ready to learn. I'm okay with it. Because when you give your 2 cents and your 2 cents is inaccurate, who looks bad? Who looks bad? The person that it's affecting, or the person that the words came out of? So never put yourself in a situation where somebody can turn around and make you look some type of way because of the words that came out of your mouth, because you just didn't know, because you were assuming something. And I've had that happen to me so many times. That's why I'm saying it out of personal experience. I've had so many people assume like so many things about me, and it's just like it's hurtful. It's so hurtful. Like I look at my life, and I'm gonna just share this personal tale with you guys. But in the year 2019, I had 19 surgeries. 19 surgeries. 2020, I finished it off with 7. Okay, so I had a lot going on. Okay, not a lot of people knew. I mean, the big surgeries, I had a lot of people come to the house.
Shayma?
The connection got a little bad.
I think we lost her.
But for those small little procedures that were going on.
I think she's back.
Shayma?
Guys, can you guys hear me? Can you guys hear me?
You're cutting off, going in and out a little bit. But
yeah, I don't know what's going on. Okay, but I'm just gonna keep it nice and simple. Basically, let's not assume. I'm just gonna keep that because the rest of y'all follow my Instagram, and we'll talk about it. Talk about it there in a second.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, just 2 quick points about what Shayma said. Number 1, don't assume, and sometimes it's even better to, I think, just ask. If you have any questions, something, ask. Be mindful, but ask. Don't just assume. And the second thing that comes to mind is Prophet Muhammad said this, and I love this hadith. It's before you assume anything about anyone or something, give somebody 70 excuses before saying anything, and it kind of means like you're never going to be able to come up with 70 excuses for somebody or about anything. So just don't assume, and don't point your finger, because when you point a finger at somebody, remember that you're pointing 3 back at yourself. So I appreciate that, Shayma. And before, we got a couple minutes left, so we're just going to wrap up. So, Dr. Monteiro, do you have any you got a closing statement, anything you want to say before we wrap up?
Just that, I really admire the strength that Shayma was displaying about herself, and just the reminders from both of you all that you never know what someone is struggling with. They might look completely amazing on the outside, and you don't. The thing with these struggles is they're not seen on the outside. So you never know. So displaying, it's almost like if you even see it as a religious duty to display that compassion and not make assumptions and to ask with kindness. Those are all things that will actually improve your own mental health, right? And it'll improve the community. And for those who are going through these kinds of struggles and hardships, to just continue, whatever it is, to continue to tap into your resilience, believing in yourself, knowing that there are downs, but there are ups too. Look at it as a wave. Life is, it's going to be, you're going to go down, but it's going to come back up too. With every hardship, there's going to be ease. And just like whatever it takes for you to really embody that belief that you have the strength and the resilience inside of you.
Yes. Thank you very much, Dr. Monteiro. So just see the positive in every situation. And like you said, with every hardship comes ease, and you learn a lot from things that you go through sometimes. And Shayma, do you want to add anything?
I think you guys hit it right on the nail. I don't want to sound too redundant, but I think Dr. Monteiro killed it.
Your voice is very important. I think people need to hear that, so I appreciate that.
I appreciate that so much.
All right,
Adam, you're a rock star too, man. Adam, you're a rock star. You do a lot. You do a lot.
Adam.
I appreciate
so
that.
He's another big rock star in the community.
I'm glad
that we're starting to have. I'm glad we're starting to have people that are open to talk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you both very much. I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope we can continue to have different conversations like this and build awareness around mental health and different diseases, and just focusing on ourselves and focusing on our community and uplifting others in the community. So thank you both very much for this. I had a great time. And thank you to our audience for your questions and your comments. And we'll see you all soon.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate you. Thank you. Bye.